Kia ora, mula, kia rana, talofa, malo, elele, and welcome to Two Palagi in a Pisinisi Pod. And it's great to be here. My name's Glen Murphy. I'm based in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and loving telling stories about Pacific business. Dave, great to be with you for another week.
Yeah, hello, Geta. Dave Dewar here. I've been working with Glen for the past 5 years, helping New Zealand, Australian and Pacific businesses succeed across this wonderful region. I'm based in Rarotonga, but previously based in Suva. And it's fantastic to be continuing that work with Glen, telling stories about the people, businesses, and organisations making things happen in this incredible part of the world.
And this week, it's hard to get past us continuing to talk about the fuel crisis, so we will regroup on that. We'll talk about the recent South Pacific Tourism Conference that was held, and we've had quite a bit to do with the ADB recently, who've been doing their roadshow around Australia and New Zealand, and we're in Auckland last week. But first, Dave, I think there's a bit of sad news again this week for a friend of yours in Fiji who sadly passed away, Ratu Epeli.
I think it's appropriate to give a tribute to someone who's had an outsized influence, not just in Fiji, but certainly in Fiji, but also, of course, the relationship with New Zealand and with the business community. So Ratu Epeli Nalatikau, who is a former president of Fiji, former Speaker of the House of Parliament in Fiji, a very high-ranking chief descended from, Fijian and Tongan royal families. Prior to that, I think a military commander of the RFMF, has passed away this week. But my goodness, what a life that man had. Having done all of those things, but for anyone who knew him, just being the consummate gentleman, the real life of the party, the capacity that I knew him best in was in his role as the patron of the Fiji-New Zealand Business Council. So certainly I think he was a great friend to me personally while I was in Suva, a great friend to the business community from New Zealand and from Fiji. So very sadly missed, but what a man, and what a legacy he leaves.
Yeah, and Dave, he, as I recall, came to your farewell from Suva and actually made the effort to make a special presentation to you to thank you for your efforts and time in Fiji. So clearly you were pretty close to him, and certainly I'm sure you're really feeling it.
Yeah, Ratu Epeli and I shared quite a few evenings together, and I've got some great stories which I'll always cherish of the connection that we had, and yeah, hugely privileged at the time to have him come and to preside over my farewell while I was there, to present me with a gift on behalf of the Fiji New Zealand Business Council, and yeah, that's a memory that I'll forever cherish.
Yeah, I'll rest in peace. And on I guess a different note, I had quite a bit of Pasifika few days. I had the commemoration breakfast for Joeli Vanderi and his impact on both New Zealand and Fijian rugby on Friday at Eden Park, which was a precursor to the Drua Blues game on Saturday, which I also attended. And then, of course, we'll come back later and talk about the ADB infrastructure briefing that you attended virtually and I attended in person. And then yesterday I had the amazing experience of popping along to the Pasifika Festival on Waiheke Island, which I had just picked up by accident that it was actually happening. And it was fantastic. It was a small thing, obviously, being Waiheke, but a lot of people there, great to see. And I was fortunate enough to get there when the school kids were performing, and they were amazing. It was an incredible Pasifika performance.
Video that you shared with me of the Waiata looked amazing, so really cool to see that.
Yeah, the kids were incredible.
We have the ASB Polyfest taking place in Auckland at the moment, right? That's been happening over the last week, and I think there's at least another week to go. I have a friend from Cook Islands who was getting on a plane yesterday to head over to Auckland to see his son performing. So was the Waiheke event associated in any way with that, or was it a separate celebration?
Yeah, I've got to be honest, I don't know much about the organisation, but I'm assuming that it is part of that whole ongoing, kind of collective of celebrations. But it was just great to see so many people out and about and enjoying it. I then did go on to something nothing to do with Pasifika, but I went on to a chili sauce festival that was on Waiheke as well yesterday.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so it was a big day of festivals.
Oh, well, there's some great chilies growing out in the region, and, I've got a very good friend here who makes an outstanding chili sauce here on Rarotonga that I had on my eggs this morning. So, maybe we could one day profile some of the great chili sauce producers from out here in the region. Consider that an
Not
open invitation.
Not a bad idea. Hey, well, let's get into the Talanoa for the week, Dave. And as mentioned, it's hard to go past the fuel crisis right now and the impact that's really starting to have across the region, really starting to be felt. And there are definite responses now coming out around that. What are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely, Glenn. I think, look, we've been talking about it now for the last sort of few weeks, and as the weeks go by, the reality of that fuel price rise is starting to bite in the region. One of the things we mentioned last week is that it's not quite as immediately visible as it might be in places like New Zealand and Australia, where prices rise on a daily or sometimes even hourly basis. There's a lot more kind of price sensitivity because it's more market driven. Whereas out here in the Pacific, most of the fuel markets are regulated, and so things take a while to flow through. And as we sort of mentioned in last week's episode, the way that that's commonly done is you have an independent, usually like a competition regulator, or here in Rarotonga they've got an independent price control board, and they work with the industry that retails fuel on the island. And there's a discussion that takes place based on the upcoming forward contracts that private business is going to have to pay for fuel, plus a freight loading, plus an allowance for it to operate in a marginal profitability, and then that flows through to a regulated price, which you see at the pump. And because they do that on the basis of kind of like a 2-monthly or a monthly delay, it's taken a little while for some of those price rises to actually flow through to the pump. Here in Rarotonga, we had the first announced price rise earlier this week. So, the price of petrol 91 went up from what was $3 up to $3.44. So, reasonably significant increase. And I think, we're going to see similar moves across the Pacific as some of those competition regulators and price regulators flow through in much the same way some of those price increases that the private operators are experiencing when they buy off the Singaporean exchange.
Yeah, and Dave, I note, and some nations are already starting to respond and take measures to help consumers, help businesses. Just a couple that I noticed, Marshall Islands are got a bill in place to reduce income tax, which is going to cost them, I think they're estimating about US $3.1 million over the next 6 months, but they're seeing that as a very necessary step to try and relieve some of the pressures. And I note in the Northern Mariana Islands, they've put in austerity measures, which include things like Mondays off. So, we are seeing some quite strong responses to help people get through this crisis.
There's been some quite strong and quite coordinated messaging across the governments in the region, and there's been various social media posts of prime ministers on phones talking to one another. It certainly is front of mind. As we talked about last week, it was mentioned in the media that it had been raised with Prime Minister Luxon when he visited both Samoa and Tonga. There have been social media posts that I've seen of Prime Minister Rambuka talking on the phone to Prime Minister Luxon, and similarly, I'm sure, to Prime Minister Albanese in Australia, but also across the region. Tonga, Samoa, all of these markets across the Pacific are really connected. A lot of them hub out of Fiji, and that's because of the way that Pacific Energy, which is the main one of the main fuel providers across the region, where it hubs into. And so just making sure that some of those fuel stocks are flowing through will be quite important. But as you say, Glenn, it's going to be a really significant impact, I think, for the region in a number of ways. So, firstly, obviously, there's the price at the pump. But of course, there's also a lot of the power is run off diesel generation. So the price of diesel, as we're learning in New Zealand, is really the big kicker for a lot of people. And in the Pacific, where in many markets you've got sort of above 60 to 70, 80% in some cases of their power being generated through diesel, very, very significant impact if that price starts going up. So there'll be a real need, I think, to buffer incomes to support people, particularly those who might not be as easily able to afford those power price rises, and that's what a lot of governments will be focused on right now, I think.
And Dave, before the show, you were commenting too that you'd picked up that some of the larger shipping companies are already putting levies on, the specific levies on some of their shipments.
So this is sort of what I think the economists out there would call your second order effects, but they will start compounding. So, you've got the price of fuel itself and getting that into the market and that going up and that impacting the power prices and everything that's generated on the island. But also there's the fact that many of the goods that come in are imported, obviously, and in fact, nearly all of them are coming in by sea, some by air, but all of those are going to be experiencing cost inflation as freight prices go up as well, because of course they've got to be paid for out of the bunker fuel that the ships use, and that's going up as price as well. So what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is some of the larger shipping lines like CMA CGM, Swire, Maersk, all putting these emergency bunker levies on their freight shipments, and in some cases that's adding something like $900 to $1,000 to the cost of a container. So quite significant increases out into this part of the world, and so we're really starting to see some of those similar impacts to what we saw sort of at the end of COVID, where you had that combination of freight restarting. A lot of diversion up into some of those northern Pacific routes between China and the US, but also the impact of the initial Ukraine war, which raised prices at the time as well. And there were some really pressing challenges for freight costs into the region. And I think that's something that businesses are going to need to take note of. They'll probably already be very well aware of, seeing some of the freight bills coming through from their providers. But really, that's going to be another impact on, the cost of goods sold in the markets where they've been imported into.
Yeah, and ultimately, I'm going to have to think about how we keep things going, how we look after the people in the Pacific as well, so that that this doesn't start affecting livelihoods. I think on that note, and I know, we talk quite positively on the show about the ADB, so I don't want to come across as if we're promoting them, but I was actually quite impressed to see that they've taken some very quick action in terms of some of their funds around just helping some of the Pacific nations to ensure they have stability in their budgets, and also to help and make sure that the private sector is supported in some of the critical import areas. So I know we're going to be hoping to have Jenny Chu from the ADB procurement side on the show in a few weeks' time. So we don't want to be too ADB influenced, but I thought that looked like another really good, positive and quick response from them to an emerging issue.
Yeah, that's a great point, Glenn. As we mentioned on our show the other week when we talked about what the ADB does in the Pacific, a large part of what everyone is aware of is how it provides loans for infrastructure construction. But another area that it's been a bit of a pioneer, and certainly some of the other development partners have adopted this practice is a tool called budget support, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a top up directly into the fiscal budget in Pacific countries. And they do it, there's a degree of conditionality that they impose on there. So they say, look, we'll provide this money into your central account. We want to see a few things as in condition for that, but they can move very, very quickly, and it's probably the fastest way to get big amounts of money into government coffers where they can then be distributed through whatever systems the governments have got. And ADB has been a leader in that, and certainly we saw through COVID other partners like Australia, New Zealand, and others kind of adopt that practice as a way to quickly get funds out to those that need it the most.
Yeah, so I think on this fuel crisis, it is starting to really bite. We are seeing things like shipping levies, seeing those second layer impacts starting to happen, but also seeing some really fast responses from different governments around the region to make sure that their people are looked after. On a more positive note, Dave, we also recently had the South Pacific Tourism Conference. Tourism's still a good warm spot in the economy, although obviously, as we've talked about before, potentially impacted, by fuel prices for jet fuel, but still with a positive view at the moment anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, Glenn. I think the South Pacific Tourism Exchange took place in Nadi in Fiji this week. So I've seen some headlines saying, "Oh, the timing was awkward," because of course it's they're seeing fuel price rises and things like that impacting the industry, and it's not necessarily the best news for an industry that's really trying to promote itself as a destination, which is what the point of that event is. But on the other hand, I think what better time to get all of the right people together to be talking about, some of those impacts and helping coordinate and plan. You had the likes of the Pacific Asia Travel Association there. The chairman of that, Peter Simone, was one of the keynote speakers at the industry day. You had, of course, Dr. Paresh Pant, who's the new CEO of Tourism Fiji, and of course many other industry representatives from across the region. The South Pacific Tourism Organisation itself, which is headquartered in Fiji, Chris Cocker, the head of that, was at the event, but also representatives from the likes of your Expedias, your TripAdvisors, your Booking.com, all of these global businesses that direct travelers into the region. And I think we were seeing some pretty nuanced messages coming out of that, obviously acknowledging some of the major challenges that are impacting tourism with the rises in fuel costs globally. But I think there's sort of a swing to that roundabout, which is the fact that is a global impact, and the Pacific, which draws primarily from those nearer shore markets of Australia and New Zealand, rightly, I think they're anticipating that yes, while prices will go up, you'll still potentially see relative demand stay hopefully quite strong from the likes of tourists that otherwise might have gone to Europe, that might have been routed through Dubai and some of those Middle Eastern routes that are now currently closed, and will maybe reconsider, a place that's closer to home and blessed to be very far from these global conflict centres.
Yeah, I hope so. Hey, and while we're talking more positive stories, I think it's probably a little bit old news. I think it actually got announced at that Hawaii conference a little while ago, but I did see that there was an announcement about the US putting $132 million into connectivity between or around the Marshall Islands and American Samoa as part of Google's Pacific Connect program. And we've talked at times about the importance of digital connectivity across the islands, and just another example of a really positive move.
I think that broader trend towards digitalization and the impact that it's going to have for connectivity across the, what's still a very dispersed region, will be quite game changing for this part of the world where data is often still at a premium. Cable connectivity, notwithstanding, that you're seeing a lot more of Starlink appearing in new markets. I see they just opened in Niue last week, but also importance of that redundancy with cable connectivity and some of the other things that it enables is going to be really important. But once again, and I always keep coming back to it, it's the energy challenge, right? So data centers use a lot of energy. And as we're about to see, I think, in the Pacific, as energy remains quite predominantly diesel driven, that importance of investment in renewable energy is going to become really, really, front of mind for a lot of people. And those that are involved, particularly in solar, but also, there's a lot of other stuff across the Pacific. There's geothermal capability. There's a fair bit of hydro capability, and a lot of quite innovative businesses across the region. New Zealand and Australia are doing some really interesting stuff in that space, and I think we will see some great opportunities to profile some of those possibilities on a future show.
Yeah. Hey, one final point, Dave, and we're going back to the ADB, and you mentioned before the show that they have been putting together a website that really clarifies the pipeline of activity that they're investing in. And I know Jenny, in her presentation, in her briefing on Friday in Auckland, did talk about this, but you were saying you think it's actually out there and available now.
Yeah, that's right, Glenn. So, let's just take a step back quickly and talk about the other thing that's happened this week, which was, of course, a roadshow by the ADB participated in it. Our friend Jenny Chu, who's the senior procurement lead from the Suva office of the ADB, travelled to Brisbane, Sydney, and I think Melbourne as part of that roadshow, and then came across to Auckland at the end of last week to speak to businesses involved in infrastructure across the Pacific. It wasn't just the ADB. We give them a lot of credit, but it wasn't just an ADB show. It was our friends over at Austrade organised the roadshow in Australia, and of course some of us and our colleagues at New Zealand Trade and Enterprise were heavily involved in organising the event in Auckland on Friday. It featured the Australian government as well. We had Carol Robertson from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade talking about the infrastructure investment that Australia makes, as well as Katrina Murison from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, which oversees the New Zealand infrastructure investment through the development program in the region. So really, really good series of events. And I think we've got some great feedback from industry about how, they've got a much better idea of what's going on in the region. But sort of separate to those and around about the same time, there's been an announcement, a bit of work that's been happening in the background for the last 2 years, really, is to meet, I think, one of the biggest challenges that the industry often talks about when they're doing infrastructure in the region, which is to say, well, there's a lot of stuff going on out there, but we don't have time to look through all of these, umpteen number of websites to figure out what's happening. So wouldn't it be great if everything was sort of in one place at a high level? And that's sort of something we've been working on through a range of different organizations. And I think this week it's gone live. There's a new website, the Pacific Infrastructure Pipeline website. It's being led out of an organization called the Pacific Region Infrastructure Facility, or PRIF, and that's an organization that's kind of funded jointly by the ADB, New Zealand, Australia, and a number of other development partners, and does some great work coordinating infrastructure policy across the region. And they've released this website, which I think the website is pacificinfrastructure.org, but we'll have a link to it in the show, and that'll be a really important development to give businesses from across the region a much better insight into what's coming up over the next 18 months in terms of large-scale project pipelines. You can filter it by country and sector and get a good idea of what's coming up.
Well, this week we've revisited the fuel issues and keeping a close eye on that, because it is starting to really bite, and we're seeing some real reaction to that and some changes happening really fast. On the more positive side, we've looked at South Pacific Tourism Exchange. I've talked a bit about the connectivity continuing to develop across the digital community in the Pacific, and have talked a little bit about the website that's being launched around infrastructure. Dave, we're coming up to Easter next weekend, and I know that you are travelling during that time, so we think we might take a little break from Two Palagi and the Pisinisi Pod next week. Where are you going, Dave?
Thanks for asking, Glenn. I'll be getting on a plane from Rarotonga, and we'll be heading across. This is my first trip actually to French Polynesia. So we'll be heading over to Tahiti, Papeete. From there, I think we'll be spending a day or two over at Moorea, which is the absolutely stunning island off the coast of the main island in Tahiti. And really, really looking forward to seeing, I think, one of the last places in the Pacific that I haven't made it across to just yet. So super excited about that. Having to brush up on my French, but hope to connect with any of our listeners who are based in French Polynesia and tuning in. We might get a chance to have a bit of a chat to them, but we'll be off air next week and coming back after Easter.
Yeah, well, we Dave, and while you're enjoying Tahiti, I will be dog sitting for my daughter's dog. So I'll be staying on Waiheke Island and taking the dog for walks and making sure he continues to be healthy.
Oh, that sounds pretty relaxing as well, Glenn.
It should be good. Anyway, Dave, great to be with you for another week of Two Palagi and a Pisinisi Pod. And would you read us out?
I'd be happy to, Glenn. Yeah, thank you very much to everyone for listening. It's been another huge week in the Pacific. It's been great to get all of the feedback that we've been getting from people across the various social channels, Facebook, WhatsApp, Viber, and of course in LinkedIn. And those of you as well know where to find us on our email address, which is 2.palagi, Palagi, @gmail.com. We're really enjoying getting some of the feedback from people about some of the topics that you're enjoying, some of the other angles that you'd like us to think about, and people and organizations that are making things happen across the region. We're always open to profiling more of those people on this show, and really appreciate you reaching out. In the meantime, please keep subscribing, telling all of your friends, and keep on listening. We enjoy this engagement. So this has been another week of Two Palagi in a Pisinisi Pod for the week ending the 31st of March.